I can't really.
The public hearing, as Paul has said, was very, very well attended, and people had a lot to say. And it was a pity that we didn't have more time. I think the 3-minute limit was okay for some, but I think there were a few other people, including me, because I wanted to go to 3 minutes and 50 seconds, but others who wanted to go to maybe 4 minutes. They didn't get a chance to say what they wanted to. So something we should bear in mind in future.
I think something I would add, since we're getting into details, which I wasn't planning on speaking to, but I would remind that at this phase in the task force, the public had nothing to respond to specifically in terms of thoughts from members of the task force. This was intended to be an early invitation for people to give, their general perspective based on just the request from the airport, but they weren't responding to any conversation that the task force put forward. That will happen in a future. Before the task force ends up coming back to the Planning Commission, the public will be able to again give feedback on specific recommendations that the task force might think about. But the initial one was really us hearing from the community in general. And so the next one will also be very interesting, and the conversations in the upcoming 2 meetings will be very interesting, because that's where we'll be talking about.
Yeah, that's really interesting perspective. I guess it'll be interesting to hear more specific feedback, because I can imagine, like, if someone can say, like, I don't want a building over there, but if you say, if we put this building in this spot, it'll keep the noise from coming towards the neighborhood, you might get a different response. If there's something that somebody is referring to or commenting specifically on, just be interesting to see if that kind of maybe changes what you were hearing at all or not.
Yeah, apparently a building doesn't protect you much from an F-35.
Yeah, they're loud.
And just as a quick schedule point, as Monica mentioned, with the snow day, everything was pushed out by 2 weeks. It was supposed to have happened 2 weeks ago, but it didn't happen until last Thursday. So the intention, and this is something that will be on the task force agenda to approve, is that everything will just be shifted by 2 weeks. So that puts the next public comment session either on March 31st or April 7th, depending on what the task force decides to do, just so that those dates are on the Planning Commission's radar. No pun intended.
And then, I actually have a question, Jessica, because it was very informative. And I do regret there was one question after I wish I would have asked an audience member to follow up on, and I'll tell you later. I don't want to bias anything. But I was really glad that Michael was there to give his 2 cents. And I have, as a planning commissioner, stayed out of some similar kinds of things before to express my personal opinion when it links to the Planning Commission in any way. And I just wasn't sure what is the protocol with that. Is there an issue with planning commissioners weighing in on another kind of committees in public comment?
No, I don't think so. I think
Monica will remember that I particularly said before I said anything else, I said, I'm a planning commissioner, but I'm speaking as a resident.
Yeah,
right. And that
was, I thought that was important because I didn't quite know, but I think that I wanted to put it
right. No,
to
and
bed that way.
that's why I'm bringing it up, because I did appreciate that. And I think what you said was very relevant and good, I mean, you did go as far as saying I think the Planning Commission should not accept this request, and trust me, I'm holding myself back many times in different committees. So I guess I'm just looking for, we don't even have to discuss it now, but I'm curious about what would you like to see planning commissioners
well, I think that what Michael said, I didn't hear the whole comment, but how he started out sounds perfect. I think as commissioners, we we have a lot of knowledge that's useful to share. And, you know, we've heard a lot of public comment on different things. We've had a lot of presentations and discussions and reports. So, you know, I think that our voices can really add to discussions in other committees. And,
Okay.
but I do think, you know, just identifying that, you know, you're speaking as a citizen, an informed citizen, is probably important if it's not something that we've discussed and voted on. So if it's something that we've discussed and voted on, then that's appropriate to say, oh, this is something we've talked about. This was the discussion and this is how it ended up, you know?
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
Okay, so we can move on to the number 5, the review of the draft amendments to the LDRs related to the general PUD, civic space, site amenity requirements, and the design standards in the site plan. So we've had a few discussions about this, the last few meetings. There's quite a few updates based on our conversation at the last meeting, and a red line version of the draft LDR changes. And if you kind of look further along in the agenda, we do have the planning commissioner report. And it has been warned that if we feel like we're ready after this discussion, we could potentially kind of warn this for public hearing at the end of the discussion. So, Michael?
Yeah, I have 3 or 4 comments, some which might return to things we discussed before, but I'll go through them as quickly as I can. The first one is on the relationship of the proposed structure to the site. That's a building placement and orientation. My question is, what about the requirement to orient for maximum solar exposure? You know, that's going to be an important piece of everything we do. That the new buildings should be oriented to get maximum solar radiation. It's mainly building and roof orientation. So it's on page 10.
Good point. So there is another spot that talks about solar and energy production, but it's not that spot.
So maybe we
Yeah.
should add it there, add something about it that that the DRB should consider that.
You know, I have to say, and this goes to what you're talking about, Michael. I keep thinking in terms of, my brain is just on the main corridors. And I'm thinking large buildings, right? And I have to get myself out of that because there may be situations where they're not right on a street and not necessarily large buildings. And then there is clearly more flexibility with roof direction. Whereas if it's a large building, it's probably going to have a flat top. And so solar can collect in any way. But just, I should keep thinking something other than just large buildings, right? There are going to be circumstances where this PUD will be used where there are smaller, all the way down to maybe a single family home.
Well,
Right?
you know,
Rarely, but
Rarely.
for amendments to existing PUDs, it could be. It's unlikely that it would often be single family homes because those tend to be in the districts where you have set up the TND or the conservation PUD, or it's below the threshold of a PUD.
Okay.
So it could happen, but it's not going to be frequently. But it could be small buildings of various kinds,
Small
certainly.
buildings.
an example I thought about was the development that's just south of Lowe's, Orchard. And those are
Old
Old
Orchard.
Old
Park.
Orchard.
Yeah.
Those are duplexes, I think. There may be triplexes, I'm not sure. But there's a lot of space within that development, which should be open for new development or additional development. And there's the kind of opportunity where building orientation, if that's, I just give it as a hypothetical, building orientation could be important, and we would be, or a developer would be free from other constraints to orient any additional buildings there to take advantage of solar.
Would,
I
a
think we
gen-
should-
would that use a general PUD?
It's more like infill.
That's why this is what I just keep coming back to when I'm looking at this, because I'm trying to, it's like, right,
Well,
so
but-
before we have an infill PUD, in that example, they
now
would
we
be
have
able
this.
to use this,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That wouldn't be
Well,
a
I
TND.
guess also just to add to this, and Paul should weigh in, we have some other locations in the LDRs where we do talk about orientation for solar, and there's some I think we use more like encourage.
We'll get to encourage.
Yeah, I know, I'm not saying it's great language. I don't think we ever require the orientation for the solar, but we do have other spots where we talk about it. So I guess I'm wondering if that could
Well,
go here too.
that is actually my second comment, which relates to on relationship of structures and site to adjoining area. That's page 12. The development review board shall encourage the use of a combination of common materials. I made a note for myself. In my humble opinion, there's no point in using the term encourage because it can be and will be simply ignored. Wouldn't it be better to say shall require the use of a combination of common materials and architectural characteristics?
Sorry, Michael.
Yeah, I
I'm-
don't see a problem with that necessarily. Michael, to that one there, I think that that's largely how the board has been employing it.
Hmm.
Especially because what it's saying is architectural characteristics, landscaping, buffering, screening to complement one another and to complement their surroundings, so. You see
So
what
that
it is?
was,
No, I'm not, I've lost where we are.
Page 4-13, 14-3,
Mhm.
or 7 of 18 in the packet. Bottom of the page,
C1.
C1.
Okay. I thought it would be in a section we were changing today. Anything in black is something that's already in the LDRs.
Unless it's that stuff that's all new.
Right.
Okay.
um,
Any issues with that being require, as Michael suggested?
And that was, what was the last one that you were?
Paul, do you have it right there?
Yeah, the other one that you were speaking about, Michael, is earlier
yep,
in 1406A1, Kelsey.
I had a comment in that area.
So
too.
I might suggest two things. One, I don't think that there's anything wrong with referencing solar gain here. It might also make sense to talk about orientation to civic spaces and or site amenities, because that's consistent with what we've done in the form-based code. I think the thing that we want to be slightly mindful of is not having buildings be haphazard without a purpose. So not to pick on, say, Grandview, but that neighborhood that's sort of on the other side of Kennedy Drive, the buildings are sort of placed around and there's lots of greenery, but frankly, it's all useless greenery. It's not big enough for kids to play in. It's not small enough to be somebody's own backyard. And so it winds up being lawn that I have walked by there dozens and dozens and dozens of times and have never once seen anybody actually using it.
Hmm.
So I think part of this is to make sure that there is some orientation of buildings that is logical and not just sort of like, well, let's have green to have green.
no, this would be an additional, this would be E. Add that requirement that
Oh.
the buildings should be oriented for maximum solar gain, or,
I
Okay,
think
so,
because you've got A, B, C, D.
it might even be a matter, Michael, of, let me take a look while we're talking here. It is referenced somewhere else, but it might be useful to bring it into this section so it's seen in one place.
Yeah, I
'Cause
mean,
I think it's sort of, it's not buried, but it's somewhere in Article
Yeah.
13.
yeah, I
but
don't,
maybe it
there's any
doesn't-
harm in having these things repeated.
Yeah, no, I agree. Well, I guess my point was if it's somewhere else, maybe we could use similar language or, a similar,
Find what we've got before elsewhere and bring it here.
yeah.
That's fine. I don't,
Yeah, and then
um,
hopefully once the climate task force has marching orders for us, we'll be able to relook at everything, so that will be. I have actually two comments for this section, if Michael's.
Sure,
Done?
yeah.
So for section A, point A there, 1A, street frontage, the comp plan, section 316 does say for future land use, neighborhoods along Kennedy Drive have traditionally kept a heavily landscaped face to the street. This should remain as future neighborhoods are established in the area. My question is, that specifically calls out Kennedy Drive and it's in the section regarding the southwest.
where are you, Monica?
I'm not in it.
She's
Well,
she's
I'm
talking about
comment-
Street frontage.
I'm talking about the street frontage, but what I was reading comes from the comp plan. And I just want to make sure that we're honoring what the comp plan says, which is to ensure that Kennedy Drive, which would include Kennedy and Heinsberg, and I don't know if I saw it in the comp plan regarding Kennedy Drive specifically, and I don't know where this generic PUD can be used on Kennedy Drive. So if the comp plan is saying that area should remain with the heavily landscaped face to Kennedy Drive, I just want to make sure we're including that in the right way. And I don't think that's in an LDR anywhere. It's just in the comp plan, but just a thought. And it could be something that's added later, maybe, but it does put it in the comp plan. We are supposed to be directing to that.
Monica, do you think that A1A is inconsistent with that, or is that just where you thought something like that could live?
Well, because it talked about street frontage. And why did I say A? What does it say in A?
It
Street
does-
frontage. I mean, that seemed, it's a very, so I don't know if it would be an underlying zoning question,
Mhm.
because there's that too, which I keep trying to go back, but somewhere, if the comp plan is saying we're supposed to be ensuring that Kennedy Drive remain robustly landscaped / forested, where are we letting people know they have to do that?
So just as a bit of orientation about where this section lives, this is in site plan review. So this is just my gut with reacting to your comment, is that something like that would be in a Kennedy Drive specific section. And then what would happen is A1A would then require new developments along Kennedy Drive to be consistent with existing.
But we don't have a Kennedy Drive specific anywhere. So this may not be the place for it, but I wanted to just point out, I was looking at some details in the comp plan for something else and that popped out. It was in the comp plan as something we're supposed to do and we haven't done it. And here we are talking about road frontage. So if it doesn't seem to fit here, but should be something that we look at in a specific, there isn't a Kennedy Road, overlay district specifically, right? It's urban overlay. So I don't know what the comp plan's intention was in terms of how we make sure that happens, but this seemed like a place to do that.
And maybe that's about setbacks, maybe, like if we're not allowing like a new building in that forested zone next to the road, that would maybe be just making sure those Kennedy Drive setbacks are
Well,
big enough.
it specifically says neighborhoods along Kennedy Drive have traditionally kept a heavily landscaped face to the street. This should remain as future neighborhoods are established in the area. So if there is it. So maybe think about it. Maybe we can revisit
Yeah, we can think on that. Part of what's going through my head is with the O'Brien neighborhood, which did keep some element of that as part of their proposal. I'm not sure that there are more neighborhoods after that that would go in. There may be individual buildings,
I mean, I guess it would apply to anything like Timberlane related if there's ever a change there. And then also at the corner of Heinsberg and Kennedy, which we know is something we'd like to make something happen there. So I'm not trying to, create a stumbling block, but I just wanted to just remind that that's in the comp plan. And maybe it's something we have to look at when we go back to the comp plan is that still what a goal is? And there was not a specific strategy or goal listed. It was just written into that section. So my second comment is on D, pedestrian orientation. Back to safety. Can we differentiate pedestrian orientation when it's either on a major artillery? Arterial, how can I get it? It's not arterial, not,
Artery
yes,
is a
thank
pumping.
you. That versus when it's on a lesser road. It just seems like connections in general, when there's something on a main road, might just need to be called out a little bit differently. So I don't know if this is something that, one of our requests is going to be to have the Bike and Ped Committee inform us on what we can do with our regulations to be safer. And we haven't given them that request yet. Maybe this is something we come back to,
Yeah.
but it's a thought that rather than treating just any, what was the language there?
I have a suggestion with that. So right now we list improving and enhancing pedestrian, two things, the connections and the walkability. Do you think we could change that to three things and include safety? So it'd be like connections, safety, and walkability? Just to be like a little more specific about, we don't just want the pathway. We want it to be safe too.
Well, I mean, I was
Okay.
thinking that if it's on a main road, does it require a further setback than if it's on a left? Like there can be some specific things which we don't need to get into, or maybe we do get into here. I don't know.
I may have a more probably considered radical idea that might satisfy your concern about safety. In the section on civic space, I know I've objected to these 50% reductions or credits last time we met. And so I've taken on 8 of 18, item 3 required area shall be. I've made a note that, and I'll read it because it's quick. For residential development, 100 square feet per unit. Scratch the rest. The DRB may, in its discretion, provide credit for up to 50% of the required site amenity if the site is contiguous with a civic space or public park. Because if they have to walk somewhere on the streets, it's a problem. So if there's a park or civic space right next door, contiguous with this, whatever development we're talking about, then fine, give them the credit. But otherwise, the design of the development has to be such that there's 100 square feet. I mean, 10 by 10 is a tiny bedroom. So it's not a lot to ask for each unit, and there may be 2 or 3 people living in a unit. We aren't asking a lot. And so, as I said last week, if there isn't enough space on the parcel, then we should shrink the footprint, but go up so that there is enough. That's a quality of life issue, I think, very important in what we're doing here.
So it's a little, well,
Ted?
Well, yeah, that's a section that I also had highlighted. I was thinking a quarter of a mile. I know it was a half, and I apologize for not being here. And I tried to read the minutes, and I couldn't see how much discussion there had been here. So I hate to be, if you've already been through this, but I'm wondering how quarter of a mile, what was the magical thing with regard to a quarter of a mile? That's one question I had. The other, I have a statement. in the sense that whatever the answer is, I still think that that may be long for elderly, for people with special needs to have to go a quarter of a mile to get to a civic space. So, you know, what Michael was sort of saying, I'm on the same page there.
And I would say one of the comments I had, and it was at a different location than the section that you're talking about, but I had a concern about giving a 50% credit when somebody has to cross a major roadway to get to it. You know, if it's on the same, maybe I like the contiguous idea. I don't know how there won't be contiguous in many areas. And so what do
Mhm.
we do? But I would say particularly if a major roadway needs to be crossed, I don't think that should count for the 50%. And it's not to harm, not to, you know, but it's just, there has to be a safe way for people, residents, to get to something in a safe way. And crossing these major roads is
Fundamentally,
not
the
safe.
safest is to stay on their common area, the common area of the development that they live in. And that's.
Well, I like
unless-
I
unless
like the
there's-
direction that you're going. I really like the, you know, definitely for contiguous. I like that. If it's not contiguous, because I mean, we want to encourage, we need to encourage residential units in our, we need to encourage those happening in our urban overlay district, and there just won't always be that space.
Yeah, and you know, the same comment can apply on page 10 of 18. And B, lots. B 4D, B4D, the bottom of, towards the bottom of page 10 of 18, same issue.
Yeah, 4D. I had it for 4D and I also had it for 1406 D4. They're basically saying the same thing.
Okay, well, it sounds like there's a few people that aren't in favor of the reduction. I mean, because Ted, it sounds like you were saying it doesn't even matter how far away it is. You're just feeling like if it's
Well, no,
Or-
not at all. I apologize. I think quarter of a mile is too far.
right,
yeah.
but so do you think if it was next door or
Contiguous.
within a few hundred feet? I mean, because a quarter mile is
I don't have a magical, but I
Pretty
know
far.
quarter miles too much. I would go certainly significantly less than that. Contiguous, yes, or I could go to a certain, but something that is reasonable for someone who has difficulties.
So in the subdivision regulations, you have blocks that are 300 to 500 feet in length. So if you felt that a quarter mile was too far, you could say something like 500 feet, which would be one block away. Or, you know, 600 feet, which
Yeah.
is an eighth of a mile.
I think it's very reasonable.
Yeah.
Something like that might represent a shorter distance. I think contiguous is could be challenging because Murphy's Law will say that there's a 40-foot wide parcel between you and the one next to it, and the DRB has to interpret things very literally. So if there's a, you know, blank piece of grass that doesn't belong to the owner, that's not contiguous. I'd probably suggest a distance, but if you'd like to apply a shorter distance, then apply a shorter distance.
okay. So if we maybe used 500 feet, one block.
Yep.
And the same side.
And have a thing that says, and would not require crossing a
Major
arterial road.
And we can label them and we can name which arterials we're talking about, but this is the area that we're talking about building. So I think it would be Shelburne Road, Kennedy Drive,
I mean, do you want
Um,
to say, is what you mean to say
4-lane road.
four-lane roads?
Yeah,
Because arterials are a lot of different things.
Yeah.
and
So
some
4-lane
things
road.
that we
4-lane.
labels arterials aren't
Yeah.
really very.
yes.
Because I guess,
Well,
you
we-
know, I'm thinking about like my neighborhood is across from Patchen Woods or Centennial Woods, and it's a 2-lane road. People do go
Mhm.
pretty fast, but we do have elderly people in our neighborhood and young kids that do safely cross there.
Yeah,
Right, well, and in the instance of a neighborhood like where you are, Jessica, I think that the intent in drafting here was, let's say that was going to be a new building where you live. And there was this space across the street. In order to demonstrate that it's safe, they may have to install a rapid flashing beacon
Right.
to make a crosswalk, which is exactly what Frank von Turkovich is doing on Spear Street to create a crosswalk with a flashing beacon to get to the rec path on the other side of the street. So it's not necessarily like you have to accept existing conditions or nothing. I think
But
that's the
you'll-
demonstration of what it means to be a safe connection as well. You're
Yeah.
nearby, but now you have to make it safe.
Yeah, so they have the right, I mean, that doesn't have to be a city thing. We can ask the developers to take that responsibility on. That's good to know. I.
Well, I think in an instance like that,
Mhm.
they're not required to make use of offsite
Mhm.
space. They could choose to say, we're not going to take the credit, we're going to do everything on site, or they could say, it's to our advantage to do something
Get people
offsite.
where they're gonna go safely, yeah.
Right, and more broadly, there's also general standards in the subdivision regulations that talk about creating safe pedestrian access.
Yep.
In the instance of on Turkovich, that's what drove it, because they're building a neighborhood on the side of the street that doesn't have the rec path in order to create safe pedestrian access to the rest of the city network. That was an element that they
So I very
put
much
into the
like
plan.
the 4-lane concept of that being a limiter for the discount. But at the same time then, because I don't want to, I mean, we need to make sure that people will build in these areas. I don't know that we need to, I mean, the comp plan is calling for more parks in the airport Chamberlain neighborhood. I don't know that we don't start to look at making sure we have in the comp plan, in our official map, some areas where we have more park space. If we're bringing in more residential, we need to have safe places for them to be. And I'm thinking honestly, I mean, I know this sounds insane, but I look at this area, I wanted to like volunteer for the, I don't know, the cemetery committee, whatever it's called, the sexton. I wanted to be a sexton because on Shelburne Road, yes, there's a cemetery and in front of it is a beautiful little spot of land
Mhm.
and nobody can touch it because it's connected to a cemetery. In Norway, the cemeteries are beautiful parks. I think I told you this all before. The cemeteries are beautiful parks and the headstones are made out of boulders and you can sit in a beautiful spot with the souls. So
I went for a very nice jog in Lakeside Cemetery back in the fall, which is designated as a park.
yeah, so so I think
Lakeside,
that
the one that's sort of by Texaco Beach there.
we know that we need to have some, we know that we want to encourage these residential buildings to happen. And I think it's our job to also make sure that there is safe, accessible civic space where we can. And
But Jessica's example, in a sense, Centennial Woods is contiguous with your development, except that there's a road between you. And Monica's point is well taken. It's a question of degree. How big or busy is the road? And probably, if it's Shelburne Road, well, you're going to have a traffic light kind of crossing. If it's somewhere else, it's one of these flashing light type crossings that you're going to have to access something that is civic space or open space or a park directly across the street from the development.
well, it sounds to me like the things that we're getting, I think, if I'm interpreting it correctly, the things that we're kind of getting some agreement were changing it to a 500 foot and a 4-lane road would be the criteria. So you don't get your credit if they'd have to cross a 4-lane.
Yeah,
And that
that's-
makes it a challenge for them. And if there's too many, then we need to make sure there are some places on the other side of that 4-lane road. But 4-lane to me seems like a very good, because that includes Williston Road.
Shelburne, but not Williston,
Williston's 4 lanes.
not everywhere. Mayfair
Well,
Park, it's kind of
do
down to
you-
2.
Are you,
Well, so a couple things. One, on, Mayfair Park, you likely will have single family homes. I guess with 500 feet, the number of public parks within distance of a 4-lane road is pretty minimal.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I guess I would encourage you that, as the city evolves, you may want to rethink some of these also, where the Penny for Paz project is putting in some heavy duty crosswalks onto our, two or three of them onto Williston Road, one onto Kennedy Drive, to foster exactly that kind of pedestrian connection. And so, if you choose to prohibit it on 4-lane roads, I would encourage you to also think about revisiting at some point, because, we're spending this money to make those become safer crossings for people to actually use.
Well, I guess
So-
part of that will be us deciding what defines safe. In the same way we have to define affordable, let's define safe. Like, and are we saying safe needs to be for an 18-year-old or safe needs to be for an 8-year-old? Like, what, is it fair for us to deem something safe for an 8-year-old? And we just need to be true to that, because we're talking about moving residential units, but there are realities. So, to your point, that if maybe there's a way to say, if there is maybe, if the city has already implemented a safe crossing that has X, Y, and Z, then okay, your 50% can count too,
I
it's.
guess, I would also encourage that, to the extent that some of this can become the purview of the DRB also, because you're thinking of it in residential context. This also could apply in an office space context. And an office space context where somebody could go across the street at a traffic light would be a potentially very safe environment for them to encourage that kind of infill.
Yes,
So
I'm thinking when residential.
Okay.
I have a question.
10?
Thank you. You'd mentioned that Mayfair Park is residential, and hopefully it'll stay that way. But I would suspect over the next couple of years that Ethan Allen Motel will probably be sold. And that's
it actually just did.
oh, it did?
Yes, I don't know whom, but I believe we just saw that it sold. So
Oh, well,
How is that zoned right now?
Well,
the, yeah,
Sorry.
that's all
sorry.
right. That's it. Okay, well, that maybe highlights even more importantly. I guess the big question is if whatever the zoning is, it may very well not be single-family homes, that there's a case where what would happen there, because again, it's a busy road. There's no park on the Mary Fifth side within 500 feet. So what would it be that the developer would be required
On site.
on site?
essentially, yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
that would be if it
Yeah.
were a 1/4 mile and they could demonstrate a safe connection, then maybe there would be maybe there's a park nearby, 500 feet. I doubt that there's one there, so their responsibility
Mhm.
would be to meet this standard here, 6% of non-residential building and or square feet per unit. That one would likely not have a major subdivision. And so the other standard that Michael was referring to probably wouldn't kick into that one. But because I think it's got to be at
So-
least 4 acres for the
So
major
where
subdivision.
where are we now? We've cut the 1/4 mile to 500 feet, right?
Mhm.
And if it so happens that there's civic space or park contiguous, then the developer gets the 50% credit
I would
or
just like,
more. Maybe we could make it more advantageous if it's contiguous, because that's quite a big deal. If
I just wanted to jump in and say a few things along those lines. The first is that the applicant has the burden to demonstrate any of this. So it's not that they can just come in and they have to demonstrate a safe and walkable connection. And then the DRB has the discretion to possibly waive the 50%. There's nothing written in here that says it is required for the DRB to waive the 50%. They have
Right.
to find that the applicant has demonstrated that safe walkable connection. So this does put some power in the hands of the DRB to make some of these decisions based on what kind of use it is, how many units it is, all of those sorts of things that they can, where the crosswalks are, and take all of that into account. In the subdivision section, you can't get any, there's no option for any credit below a 6-acre subdivision. For
Above.
the other way, above a 6-acre subdivision. So this is only dealing with subdivisions that have more site constraints because they're a bit smaller. And so they don't necessarily have the ability in a reasonable way, in a feasible way, to have all of their site amenity to be on site. But anything above 6 acres has to have everything on site anyway,
in the
in subdivision.
Right.
Yeah, in the subdivision rules.
So the DRB can waive height restrictions, right? Elsewhere in this.
in some districts, yes.
So in those districts, does that mean they could add additional stories to a building? And therefore shrink the footprint if there are site constraints?
Yes.
Okay, so that would be one of the options that a developer could have in order to comply with the on-site requirement for civic space. They could ask the DRB to let them go up, and they'd get the same number of units, but in a smaller footprint, and have more space around it.
Yes, with the sort of caveat that
No caveats.
well, parking drives a lot of things, even though we don't love it to. So building footprints, especially for larger ones, are often sort of dictated by, can they fit parking underneath it? Because if they can't put it underneath it, then it has to go next to it, and then they've got another problem. So,
Yeah, and then the only other thing that it feels basic, but I think it should be said that it does still, you're always required to have 50% of your site amenity or civic space requirement on your site. The waivability is only for half. So you're
Yeah.
not in a situation where suddenly, because someone can go 500 feet and reach a large park, that then they can have nothing on the site. Like, that's never how this is written. They still have to have 50% of their requirement on the site, regardless of what's around them.
It's a subjective thing in a way, because if you've only got 50% of the space required at 100 feet per unit, and you've got 10 units, now you've only got 500 square feet instead of 1,000, but you've got the same number of people squashed in it. This civic space is where the residents of a building get out and meet together and socialize
Yeah. And it
with
will be
masks
there. I
on.
mean, it
So,
will be there.
You know, I came to this from the quality of life aspect, because, you know, I live in a place which has fortunately, a lot of open space, because the developer went broke before he could build everything.
Mhm.
And that space is amazing, how many people in our development meet outside in this space and let their dogs play with each other and their children. I mean, it's really makes a massive difference.
okay, so we've so far reduced it to within 500 feet. And is there also consensus about not crossing a 4-lane road?
Yep.
Okay. Good. So we'll add those two things to the 50% waiver. Anything else on civic space while we're,
I have a safety question on civic space. Again, thinking about them being on the main roads and smaller areas. Is a civic space meant to be for the residents only, or is it a public space for anybody happening by?
So there are a series of different site amenities that one can choose from. That's in the table
Yeah.
that's in there.
Yeah,
Some of them are more residentially oriented, some of them are more commercially oriented. So it really depends on the use.
well, okay, so let me rephrase. So for a residential building, let's say someone's going to do primary, maybe some commercial on the first and then primarily residential. So a lot of residential units. Do we have a way of ensuring that I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you, unless you just make it accessible only from inside a building. But is there, or is that just not an expectation?
I think
If
what
you're
we're
on the corner of-
finding,
yeah.
so
Private
in the city
property,
center
yeah.
form-based code, we do try to sort of parse out into what's residential amenity, what's commercial amenity. I think what we're finding so far, 5 years in, is that by trying to draw very precise boxes, we have lost some creativity and good problem solving by good landscape architects.
Are there some successful residential civic spaces that are,
The building next door to us has one in behind the building, a nice seating area for all of the seniors.
Okay.
The Champlain Housing Trust building has a playground in the back.
oh, they do, okay,
They do there.
okay.
The
Okay.
former Olympiad building, wasn't a requirement, but they have a little barbecue area. One that's in a gated area that's associated with the stormwater pond, another one that is more of like a
Mhm.
adult convening.
So I think my comment is really coming from a place of if we are going to be focusing on building now on some of our major roads in a way that we haven't focused on that before, they will be more, anything outside will have more public exposure. And we just need to be aware of that. If there's a playground, then either it has to be gated for just the people that live there, or it will be used by other people because it will be visible. And I don't know if
Well, and I think that that's, I guess where I would say I would encourage that to be something that is a dialogue between the DRB and the applicant. Because the more we try to write exactly the solution every single time, the more somebody who has a good idea has to be told no.
I understand, but do
And-
we want to weigh in or do we just not?
I
mean,
would
it's
weigh
not-
in, yes. It's private property. The residents can exclude the public if they so wish or not. In my case, we don't. People from the golf course and Indian Creek and Heatherfield walk through, they walk their dogs, it's,
Well, but you're a condo,
it-
you have a
but-
condo association. I mean, this is an apartment building owned by somebody who maybe lives in
Yeah,
another
but the
state. Like
residents-
who's,
the residents, that's their open space, that's their civic space.
Are you saying that you want to exclude the public? Or are you
I-
saying that you don't? Are
I just
you-
want to be, I just want to understand what the expectations are for a building when we're saying it has to have X civic space. If it's on the corner of two major roads, there's going to be a lot of people that want to just cut through there. And I might be one of them because I'm always looking for a cut through. Are we talking about, when we say civic space, are we expecting it to be where just neighbors go to visit with other neighbors? Or can we realize, I lived in New York City for a long time. If there's a nice bench somewhere, anyone's going to find it and sit on it. And so the expectation we just need to be clear on what we're looking for. If we think that the residents of an apartment building are going to have a say, they're not. They're unless it's a condo association, the residents of an apartment building where they're renting are not going to have a say in whether a playground is only for them or not, right? So it
Well,
has to
they're paying
be,
for it with their rental.
well, but I'm just saying, the design the design of said playground
Hmm.
or of said sitting area will dictate, because it's either going to be connected to a door on the building that's otherwise fenced in, so no one can get in and it will be understood, or it simply won't.
Hmm.
And I don't know what my preference is. It's creating, this is, I think, when we're looking at buildings, residential buildings on these roads, we need to just think through that aspect that we haven't had to weigh in on before. And I don't know what the right answer is.
Well, we kind of did, because, almost all of these site amenities were created for the T4 and T5 districts, which, maybe doesn't have the same number of cars driving by necessarily, but they do kind of surround, some of our busier roads, Kennedy Drive and Williston Road, and these site amenities were created for that kind of busy downtown area. So I think they're actually a
but-
little more applicable than they were in the southeast
But
quadrant.
everything that's been pointed out has been
We should try
behind a
to
building
regulate.
that can't be
Okay.
seen.
Well, Ted?
I'm sorry. I mean, I think we're making it way too complicated. This is a private building. It's not a public space. It's a civic space for the residents. And if, whether it's association or the owner of the apartment building deems that he would like to have it available, that's great. If he would like to have it exclusive, unfortunate, but that should be his prerogative.
Mhm.
I think it bodes, again, the whole discussion that Monica brought it up, and I've mentioned before, about I'd really like to see this 10,000 square feet and say, we know we're going to have X number of people. I said this before, X number of people in this particular area. What are we doing as a community to either buy land or provide actually public space? And I'm really, really worried. Of course, I'll croak by the time all this stuff is built, but I'm really worried that 10, 15, 20, 30, 100 years farther out, people are saying, where is a place where we can recreate? So, but again, that's another discussion, but just, I think we should put to bed this discussion about the
Well,
space.
it sounds like we don't weigh in. They can, it's a deal. Yeah. Okay, anything else on the open space or civic space or the changes to the table, since we kind of just referred to the table?
I love what you did with the private balconies. Thank you.
So in that, we added 2 site amenities for your consideration. One is the private balconies. And you'll note that it says there that if not every single unit has one, then it only gets to count for part of it.
Yep.
And the other was this idea of an indoor-outdoor space to give a little bit of opportunity for creativity. If you're doing something upper stories, things like that. I think we came around to thinking of there are circumstances where a balcony, whether we're talking about a large building or even we're talking about the east end of Market Street here, that while there are actually other civic spaces on those properties, the one that is actually getting used as a civic space or as an outdoor space by the residents is their front porch.
Yep.
And that's a good thing. So
That's a great thing.
Well,
Thank
are
you.
you saying that's counting towards the civic space?
not civic space, site amenity
Oh, okay.
for that type of dwelling unit.
Anything else on table, open space or civic space?
And actually, Kelsey, one
Did-
little
did we
typo I
agree
just
on that
realized.
it's 100 feet,
This should
not
be called
less?
site amenity requirement, not
Yeah.
civic space.
Oh, no.
I was
I think
wonder-
we
I thought-
didn't,
yeah, 'cause I thought
no,
it
that
was
was your
civic
other
space.
thing.
No,
So
Civic
that's fine,
space is
it's
more
okay.
public.
No,
site
we didn't
amenities is
agree to
more
that.
public.
We should, you should,
building
because you
space.
said
They
too
can't
many
use
things
their
at
s-
once.
their
Let's go back
civic
to
Get a
that.
little bit of
measurement.
credit
still
on
on.
site,
Okay.
but otherwise, no.
Okay, so it sounds like Michael had an additional suggestion here. So
Yep.
scroll down a tiny bit, Paul, there. So I think, let me get this right, Michael, down further. So what, oh yeah, right there, right under Paul's little hand, it says for less than 10 units, 100 square feet per unit. I think Michael's saying for any number of units, it should be 100 square feet per unit. And there wouldn't be a discount for more units. Is that
Yep.
right? That's what your suggestion was?
So-
Not less than 100 feet.
So
Square
those
feet.
numbers are coming directly from the form-based code. So that's where we got the numbers and the number of units that scale from is
So
from,
Paul and I screwed up then.
I'm not saying anything.
You
I'm
point to the
just,
Paul to your left or to your right?
And
yeah, which
Ted.
Paul?
It was all three of you.
Since it was written.
All three of you did
Oh, well,
this,
you
so
on this form-based code committee as well?
yes.
Oh, my
So I-
God, the whole side
kind-
here screwed
yeah.
up.
I guess I kind of feel like we should keep this because it's consistent with form-based
I agree. I'd
code
like
for
to keep
now.
it.
And if,
Because we're talking about some
I
tight
think, as
spaces.
I say, I think we made a mistake, but if the majority feel we have to live with it, we have to live with it.
does it seem like a good idea to be consistent with form-based code for now?
Yeah, I
Or-
agree. Yeah.
Okay.
So I had something on page 15. What page are we on right now?
8.
Oh, okay.
8 of 18.
I had
Well, I
a
jumped
couple
from
on
8 to
page
15,
14 of
so-
18.
Well, we'll go with Monica first.
Are we on 15? This is just something that we mentioned last week and I didn't see a way that it was dealt with. And that is the R7 NC 400 foot.
Well,
Can
Um,
we,
I've got that too.
can we come back to that one at the end
Yes.
of this
Okay,
discussion?
we'll
'Cause I
come-
think
we'll
that's a
come back
slightly
to that.
separate
Okay.
thing.
Okay, so that's, so
Very
then,
important, but I'd like to sort of set the rest of the general PUD and then come back to that.
okay,
one
and then
if
I had
that's a-
something on 18, page 18, so I don't know if Michael had something before page 18
Okay,
or should
Michael, you
I?
said something
14,
on
On
14.
page 14, yeah, I had. Find it here. Under the general PUD description, purpose and characteristics, or above, sorry, authority limitations. Under 3C, the question is, it says applicable, that they cannot change the applicable lot coverage or building coverage maximums allowed within each zoning district as measured across the PUD as a whole. What about the use of inclusionary and TDRs? Wouldn't they be usable there to get extra density? Wouldn't the DRB be allowed to permit that?
Yes, I suppose that that's a good catch, that 3C should reference, just as 3A does, the use of TDRs, because we do allow TDRs to be used to increase lot coverage in certain districts.
So, yeah, it was
Okay,
lot coverage
so-
and building or building bulk.
Okay, so that seemed, we should do that because that's like a
And then
technical
Under
fix.
B, there's a,
So what, so just to make sure we have a note on that, we'll make that correction because that is a factual statement that that's an eligible thing. Thank you, good catch.
Okay, Michael, go ahead.
then it says incorporate a density development under B, the fourth bullet point says incorporate a density development compatible in design with the surrounding area. Wouldn't that, don't we want to allow as much density as possible? Because this statement seems to preclude increasing the density by whatever means we have. TDRs, for example, or inclusionary, unless I'm misreading it. But it does seem to be a limitation or preclude us from increasing density.
Well, I thought the idea with the general is that you have to use underlying zoning. So it wouldn't, if the underlying zoning well,
I guess let me see if I can get what you're thinking, Monica. Should this refer to like the planned density? I know there were some other spots we've talked along the way about like the planned density versus like what happens if the parcel next door wasn't developed yet or just had one building on it or something, like would that?
It may be that the writing is just a little bit too subtle there, because in rereading it again after hearing Michael's thing, what it says, if one takes out the commas, incorporate a density of development that supports a walkable residential mixed use transit supported development. So I think when this was language that Sharon had written way back, I think what she meant to do is to say, you must be at least a certain amount of density because you're trying to create a walkable mixed-use transit-oriented development. But I can see one of the things I've learned of Sharon's writing is that it's very, very, very subtle in her style of grammar, that it could be read by somebody to be dissuading. And I
mean,
think that's what
we
you're
should probably add the word maximum somewhere in there, in that case, and that would alleviate the misconception that we're limiting it somehow.
See, Michael, I thought your issue was with the phrase compatible in design with the surrounding area, because I actually read that phrase as being more like building materials, architectural features, things like that, that you couldn't suddenly put a, not to pick on anybody, but a communist block in the middle of the orchards. So it was less about the compatibility in that sentence is about it's the ability of a denser development to still blend into things that are sort of around it without being too abrupt in an aesthetic way. But as Paul mentioned, this is not language that he or I have written, so
So
we may be reading it differently than she intended, and it can be changed.
So what you're saying then is incorporated density that supports residential mixed-use transit-oriented development rather than.
Yeah,
Right, so the
Which,
way I
which
would
would
have
imply
written,
that we don't want more. We
Yeah.
only want enough density to support what's written there, walkable, residential, mixed-use, transit-oriented.
So I think what Paul's saying is you should maybe even get rid of the words compatible in design with the surrounding
right, well,
area.
what I would have, had I written that, I probably would have written it to say something like incorporate a density or intensity development that supports walkable, a walkable residential mixed use and transit-oriented development in a manner that is compatible with its surrounding area. In a manner that is designed to be compatible with its surrounding area. So you don't have abrupt transitions of one 8-story building right next to a single family home. The
Okay,
density
I'm
could be
gonna
the
delete that
same
one.
by having low-lying buildings. But
Okay.
the compatibility can be done architecturally, I guess is how I might have written it, but
Well, can we just say we'll put that compatible in design with the surrounding area at the end of the sentence, so it's, you don't have a qualifier in the middle? Would that be more clear?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then I had one minor comment on that same series of bullet points. The penultimate one, support and enable affordable housing development, should be at the very top. It should be the first bullet, not the second to last.
Is everyone okay with that being up at the top?
Hmm?
Housing at the top of the list?
Yep.
Okay,
Move up the comprehensive plan too. Comprehensive plan should be on top. too.
do you want, is it okay, Michael, if the comprehensive plan goes first and the affordable housing goes second?
and if you're in this area, I might actually suggest, since we reference later the climate action goals, right? Kelsey?
yes, the
So
climate,
this might be a good place to say conforms, a defining characteristic is that it conforms to the comprehensive plan and the city's adopted climate action, because we do references it as a
it's
reason.
referenced later on as a basis for which the DRB can waive some
Right.
of the other requirements.
So it might not be a bad idea to also talk about it as a characteristic of it.
Well, you
Okay,
put it
does
second,
that seem
put it
good?
at number 2.
Affordable housing number 2?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And comp
Comprehensive.
plan plus the climate action plan first?
Yeah.
Okay, those are
Okay.
my notes.
So is it
Okay.
time for my page 18?
Yep, sure. We're on to,
All right. Page 18, number 6, housing mix. And it says in our packet, please, let's discuss this. My comment on that is that, because I keep thinking of the large buildings, right, apartment buildings that, I sent this language to Jessica and Paul and Kelsey before the meeting, but I would recommend that within the housing mix, if a parcel is to contain a larger multifamily building or buildings, such as an apartment building, we should consider requiring varying numbers of bedrooms.
I think that might be there in the last sentence.
yeah,
Well, and so what I would recommend though, is something that's like for units or for buildings that have like above 4 but less than 12, contain a minimum of 2 different, but 12 to 24 contain 3 different bedroom varieties. Doesn't mean they have to have all 3 bedrooms, but have 3 different bedroom varieties. And for 24 plus units, contain a minimum of 4 different bedroom varieties.
I'm not opposed to the idea. However, it may be very tricky for an applicant to reconcile that with the inclusionary standards that also reference numbers of bedrooms. So your average number of bedrooms for your inclusionary units must be no less than your average number of bedrooms for your market rate units. And also you get bonuses for larger
Mhm.
numbers of them.
It's just normally when someone's going to build, they're going to have kind of the same footprint on top, floor to floor. Like that's what they did over at Allard Square. It's just you kind of have, and so they're all kind of stacked up on top of each
So-
other. So you kind of have to, it doesn't matter what the breakdown is, but something that ensures that you're not going to have a large building with only studios in it.
Could we be maybe a little less prescriptive, Monica? 'Cause so right now this handles the more than 4 units includes 2 or more different types of either buildings or bedrooms. Could we have another threshold that requires 3 different types?
Rather than the 3 and the 4. I
12
mean, this is to be discussed,
units or
sure. It's
something.
just, it would be a shame if a building ended up with nothing but studios and 1 bedrooms. If we're going to really look at, especially if down the road, some of these do happen to be condos for purchase, like let's get some larger units in there.
Thoughts? Or-
And this is what we do in all of our neighborhoods. All of our neighborhoods, we're making sure that they're not just single family homes. We're making sure that they're single family and duplex and so let's keep that same flexibility and versatility. It's particularly the larger the building becomes. So if it's going to a minimum of 3 different kinds for 12 up or whatever, that's better than 1.
My suggestion would be that this might be something to include into the dialogue that you were speaking about with the affordable housing group. The reason I'm a little bit concerned about it is I like the idea of it. I'm just worried about unintended consequences. So a couple of years ago, for instance, it didn't wind up getting built because the numbers didn't work out, but the developer had proposed and gotten approved a building that was going to be sort of a new a new product in the market of micro apartments for those people who really just don't want or need much of a kitchen. And so there was going to be, very small apartments where the price point was going to be not perpetually affordable, but targeted to the under $1,000 a month, which is just missing entirely in our market. Had a standard like that been in here, that would preclude this from existing because the whole mode of how they were doing it was by volume. I'm very supportive of the idea of getting some more bedrooms and units. I just would recommend that might be something to spend a little bit more time on before sort of throwing in, because I think that there's some different tools that you may want to think about how to do it. But
Yeah,
it's
and
your
Maybe it
call.
could be targeted for our affordability discussion with the Affordable Housing Committee, because I know the mix of housing types was something they had weighed in on before. Maybe this is a spot we could use some input as well without.
So I did get unofficial feedback from some outside of committee, just so you know, this
Yeah.
wasn't really, but as long as we have that meeting sooner versus later, because I mean, or do we start with the more aggressive approach and perhaps pull it back?
well, I guess I have a quick question. There are different, this is an understatement, but there are different parts of South Burlington that have different types of housing needs. And I'm thinking specifically around the university. If you end up, someone proposes a building that's 50 units and it's targeted to students and or to grad students or med students or whoever it is, with thresholds like you're talking about, Monica, will we end up with having developers, and this is just a brainstorming of unintended consequences kind of problems, a developer being required to suddenly have 4-bedroom unit, like studios, 1s, 2s, 3s, and 4s in a building that otherwise is programmed to and focused to the student population? And will that prevent some of that student housing being built in a certain way? I'm just throwing it out there. I hadn't really thought about it before the second, and now I'm just babbling. So
Well, I
it's
mean,
just
college
thought.
students share, have roommates.
No,
It's-
sure,
yeah,
sure. But if you're
so-
an incoming med student, maybe not.
Studios, yeah. Makes sense.
Can't we pass it to the Affordable Housing Committee and have an official vote by them?
You could certainly ask for them to weigh in during your public comment period, and
Yeah.
you can make a change at your public hearing. Also, as you know better than almost anybody in the community, you can always change regulations.
Mm.
So the question is to start with it on the more aggressive side or not?
I guess I would recommend we start with how it's written here, so there's not some additional change after we vote it out to public hearing.
I guess.
Well,
what
we
I-
had other things too, though, that probably have to, I don't know that we'll be able to vote it out today, will we? Are we able to?
With changes, maybe.
So far, I have four changes that were all pretty straightforward, I think, written down.
Well, we didn't really address how to, the name, like the Kennedy Drive piece. I think we didn't get back to that.
Yeah, that wasn't one of them.
I know, but we didn't decide it wasn't going to be one of them. We just let Paul think about it for a minute. We didn't officially take that off the table. So anyway, I'm fine with whatever the majority wants to do.
The last thing I'll say on the housing mix is that between the various mix requirements and the inclusionary requirements, it is a very tricky thing to be tracking all of this. I will say, especially because very rarely is a building just one building. So, you know, if you were to looking at projects like some of the O'Brien ones, we have spreadsheets upon spreadsheets of trying to keep track of all this. The more that we say each building has to say this, it gets really, really, really hard for us and for developers to make sure it's being done right, which is part of my like, if we're going to look at this, I want to look at it together with inclusionary so that they're matching and that they're not setting two slightly different things, because that becomes almost impossible for us to
So if we
manage,
did
just to be
warn,
totally honest about it.
Sure.
It's, you know,
Yeah.
our administrative responsibilities between this, the environmental standards and the energy and the inclusionary has gone up dramatically. And now civic spaces, it's all great stuff, but the more that we add little pieces to it, the more that we have to have another thing to be making sure it's tracked unit by unit, building by building. and
so
it's
if we
tricky.
warn it as this, but we are asking the Affordable Housing Committee to give us their opinion, and they just send us a memo that we just kind of read. Okay, we need to make sure that if we're approving this, but we're asking for their opinion, that we receive it and discuss it. And if we did decide to go with what they recommend, would that require an additional? No,
Does not require another hearing.
if we
You
just
can make
change
any
the,
changes that you like after your
oh,
public
it's the
hearing.
city councils that would,
The council
okay.
that has to have another.
Okay, so do
Yep.
we, so,
Well, I think my initial recommendation was that we follow up with this as part of the like joint learning discussion about affordable housing as more of a whole. But I think you suggested maybe having them weigh in on it.
well, Ted discussed it. And this again is not an affordable housing issue. I mean, this is, we're putting a lot of homes in this area. They're not affordable, you know, they're not all going to be affordable. This was just a housing, as we have in all the neighborhoods, the diversity, so have in these buildings. So just so you understand, it's not, I wasn't coming at it from an affordability. I understand that the inclusionary creates a calculation that complicates. I just wanted to be clear that if we do have the housing, if we do warn this as is, and we ask the housing committee to weigh in at the public hearing, that we make sure we reserve time to discuss their assessment.
One quick clarification, Kelsey, you brought up a point with regard to student housing. Now, UVM has threatened that, you know, if we don't change the zoning at some point, Ellen Woods, that they might put up housing there, or, you know, student housing. Now, would they be required under our regulations to comply with whatever we've decided?
Not for student housing, right?
So my comment was not necessarily about UVM putting up more dorms or more, you know, student apartments that are UVM owned.
Right.
My thought was more private developers who are looking to cater to incoming students, privately owned, not owned by UVM, not associated with UVM, except that the design is in a location and with the elements that students are looking for, some of those amenities.
Well, again, you know, Edlin Woods is not on campus per se.
Mhm.
It is their property. But so you're saying if they decided, UVM decided to put up either, you know, student housing or
Mhm.
faculty housing or whatever, that they must comply or do they get a free pass?
It's a tricky
It's sort of in
subject.
between.
So for example, a few years ago, one of the buildings on Quarry Hill Road was built by, can't remember if it's Larkin or Deloria, but it was built by one of the two of them.
Yeah.
And then UVM, and then subsequently Champlain College, or maybe the inverse, leased it. In that instance, it was housing that was approved under our regulations that was leased by that entity. In another instance, it might be Champlain College or UVM building it, and it might be a different set of facts in those different scenarios. So might take a little more unpacking to give you
And
Yeah.
again, this
complete
is sort of
answer.
what my thought process was with regard to what Mana's suggesting is that, as you say, the unintended consequences. And I'm not sure if in this situation, these situations could be a problem. Rare,
Yeah,
but
it's a little more complex if it's owned or developed by the public institute, the educational entity. I was thinking of more, so in Winooski, there's a building called Spinner Place, and it's right on the Rotary, and it's marketed to and designed for students. But it's not owned by any actual not any of the large educational institutions in town. So it's a difference between a student-oriented private development versus a public institution developing housing for its own students.
Any thoughts on Monica's suggestion in the way to move?
I'm not quite sure how to.
It's quite complicated and restrictive or prescriptive, put it that way, what we've got in the draft here.
I was wondering if there's any public thoughts too.
And it's
'cause I
not
know a
an
few people.
necessarily an affordability issue, it's just housing mix. It may be affordable.
Yeah, well,
It
part
may not.
of the reason I referred back to the Affordable Housing Committee is because I know that the mix of housing types was something that we got positive feedback specifically from that group when we were talking about the last draft that's now the regulation. So I guess right now we're listing two different types. Monica was suggesting as the number of housing units goes up, there'd be more and more types,
In something like we have in the TND, you mean?
That's exactly, that's,
It's a lot, but that's a much more intrusive requirement because it's at least 3
I know.
and not more than 50% of one. And we are trying to be quite flexible here with the general PUD. So I'm.
Yeah, but we're
trying to
also
move
planning
away-
on moving a lot of housing here.
Beg
I
pardon?
mean, we're hoping that we have a lot of residential units here. So it's just, it'd be do we start more conservatively and loosen it to not miss a chance, or, that's,
I would leave it the way it is for now.
is there any public, can we hear from the
Yeah,
public?
do we
if
have any
they-
public
anyone-
comment on
Anyone from the
this?
public
or-
want to weigh in? Oh, Sandy wants to weigh in. Thank God.
Sandy, you can go ahead.
I agree that it's more complicated than maybe I was thinking at the beginning, but I'm trying to think of where, unless you're going to tear down on the houses on the street where I live, where close to the UVM is there private property to be developed for student housing? Because Quarry Hill is it's either built out or the process is built out, in the process of being built out, and pretty much everything else that I can think of that's contingent to UVM is either the country club or they own it. UVM owns it. So I'm having trouble trying to think of this in terms of accommodating student housing. The other thing is has the city place a priority on providing housing for students? I guess I still remain a little, I'm not having any trouble with your housing type. I'm still uncomfortable with a significant size building that has only studios and one bedrooms. But, you know, as I said, we do have a meeting. The Affordable Housing Committee has a meeting on Monday. I mean, we could talk about it then, because I certainly am not going to speak for the Affordable Housing Committee,
Yeah.
but I think numbers of bedrooms is something that does accommodate different setting, different situations, and certainly a 2-bedroom apartment could be occupied by 4 students, you know, if they were willing to share bedrooms and save money. Just as an aside, there are problems in Berkeley. I heard on the radio this afternoon that there's some houses there that are rented by 14 students in a 2,500 square feet house. Anyway, so it made me think our problems aren't as great as they are somewhere, but that's just an aside.
Okay, great. So it sounds like maybe for now we leave it with the 2 types.
Well,
and if we,
I would agree with leaving it for now, but since there is a meeting on Monday, perhaps we do ask for the Housing Committee's perspective, because in that question of, do we start more conservatively or more aggressively? And then be open to, you know, hearing that at the public hearing and discussing it
Yeah.
after.
yeah, I think that's very reasonable.
I mean, yeah,
Well, and again, I just, would like to reiterate that you can always change regulations in the future once you've had an analysis of, where are the gaps in our community, and have had this discussion about what are the missing needs and affordability. You can always change it. All of this is a greater variety than what a building would have been 6 months ago under the last set of regulation, with no additional density being allowed. So you're already taking a step forward.
right.
Um,
But I'd
on-
also say, since that time, we've also just completed regulations, and we know we're going to be opening up TDRs that would have been duplexes.
Which aren't included here. So
That's
yeah, so
well,
part
right,
of,
so
yeah, I guess, so part of
It's the
what
middle.
The Affordable Housing Committee Chair and I were talking about was, as part of that discussion on affordability, also having part of that discussion be about what's missing. So maybe that is possibly even the best time to circle back to like what's missing, and is there something else we need to be encouraging? I don't know.
So does it sound like we don't want to ask the committee to weigh in for the public hearing, or they probably, we don't even have, they're hearing us have this conversation now, they can opt to do so.
Yeah,
I guess I would just
maybe
ask if
that's,
they-
maybe that's the better move. If they have some knowledge already or want to weigh in, because this conversation's happening and many people have heard it. But it's kind of a hasty ask, if we are really going to be having the public hearing very quickly.
Well, they're meeting on Monday, they said, so it could be very simple. They could absolutely agree with the language as written, so.
Janet, did you popped up, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, I was just thinking that I really support the idea that was mentioned in the beginning of the meeting on a joint learning session on affordability with the Affordable Housing and the Planning Commission. I think the spot weighing in on things is great, but working together and learning, and some of those questions, Jessica, like you're saying, number of bedrooms and affordability, what types of housing are missing, those are big issues that I think would benefit some shared learning. So I really support that. And the sooner the better that can happen.
Yeah. I guess that's what I meant by hasty.
Mhm.
Like, yes, we can ask, but it's a spot ask without the bigger context and bigger discussion.
Mhm.
So the reverse is just if they do come to us in the public hearing, I hope that we can give it some
Oh,
weight. Because
Yeah.
they gave, just
yeah, I agree. Okay, other items, Michael, go ahead.
No, not on that,
Yeah, go ahead.
on page 15 of 18. This, in the R7 NC zoning district, we have this 400 feet from the frontage on the arterial road.
Are,
No,
are we,
I've
are
had-
we done with the other stuff first? Because we said we were going to come back to that when everybody else
Oh, I
was.
thought we were done.
Oh, I wanted, let's make sure we're done with the other stuff. Any other, Paul? Did you have any-
One little question. What's our, how high can we build up in South Burlington?
It depends on the district. Along Shelburne Road, it's 5 stories for most of Shelburne Road. Form-based code, it's 5 stories for most, and then 6 stories right here where we are now. Other districts, it's default of 35 feet, but the board has the authority to allow for taller. That's where we're at for the most part right now. I think that there may be some interest in going up, but once you go past 5 stories, you're a different form of construction. So the market hasn't really demanded it too much yet, but it may change in coming years.
I could see going up along Shelburne Road and Williston Road.
Yeah, I think what would happen is if something went past 5, it probably becomes, it doesn't become 6 because 5 can be a wood frame construction now, but then you have to go to steel, so you probably would be at 8.
Yeah.
Or
'cause you
something like
mentioned
that,
8
which-
You mentioned 8 before,
Yeah.
And then you're probably into structured parking too, in order to accommodate that. So then you've got to really build out your site to make that pay for itself because the parking is just so expensive to build. So there's some interesting sort of break points in it. And I think that that's one of them.
I think the community would be interested in that conversation too.
What?
I think the community would really want to weigh in on that too. I could see that being
Yeah.
lively.
I think, yeah, as I said
Was-
before we finished with the last iteration, I'm very keen to look at zoning for much
Oh.
taller buildings in certain areas.
Did you have anything else, Paul?
No,
Okay.
thanks.
Ted or? Okay, then,
I had the only other one I had, which is not, I don't know where this would even go, but in terms of allowable uses flexibility. So just so I understand, the general PUD won't get into allowable uses because that's going to be the underlying zoning.
Correct.
Is there anything that, given the parcels that are coming up in the areas that are of most interest with all this, are there any allowable uses that we should be looking to add flexibility to or broaden?
There's a few things that Kelsey and I have been discussing that we didn't want to sort of stick into this round because we know that you were on warp speed.
Okay,
But there's a few topic areas. One of them is cultural centers and allowing them in more places. One of them is we don't really have a good way to allow for small scale food makers. Somebody who's selling stuff to Healthy Living, if they're not doing it in their house, it's automatically called light industry, which means it can only be in an industrial district. So you can't have like a little kitchen on Shelburne Road that makes momos.
okay.
Cannabis will be a subject in the next year or so to also work on, but we didn't want to sort of conflate subject
Okay,
areas when
So
you're
not for
working on
now,
it,
but okay,
but stay tuned.
okay.
okay, so now the NC7, yes.
R7NC.
Can I do a little table setting before we go into the
Ah.
details of that? Because I think there's sort of a question of to include or not to include.
Okay,
generally.
Paul,
That's
take it
where I-
off. Take it, take it
Well, then
away.
go ahead, Michael, you start.
Um,
If you're at that level.
Yeah, I had thought a lot about this after our last meeting and again today, and I came to the conclusion that, to be honest, we shouldn't fiddle around with this. We made a decision, voted by the majority for this particular zoning change. And apart from that, we already know that the landowner doesn't like it. So I think we should leave it exactly the way it is, or the way it was, in the LDRs, which were accepted, adopted by the council. And we can come back to it when we get into the next round of amendments, because we're likely to have a request for a change, almost certainly. So it's fraught because it was a tough thing for us to get past in the first instance, and it's fraught because the landowner doesn't like it. So I think we should not mess with it. We should just move on, and we'll know more of what we have to do later on when we get into the next round of amendments, because by that time, perhaps the landowner will have made his intentions
Mhm.
known to us, other than threatening us with legal action.
Okay, well, so I think what I'm hearing is take it out of this round because this is the warp speed and we
Yeah, that's
haven't,
another
and
reason for it.
so that's,
But that, I'm not disagreeing, but my question is, are there other, this is a broad picture and there are a number of places that this general PUD will take effect. And are there other areas where that measure is important? It seemed very limited to.
Well, in this instance, this is the only area in the current draft where something that would presently, as adopted, be applicable for one PUD type would create another one. So that's a somewhat unique thing only in this R7NC. I think from the staff perspective, we think that broadly speaking, there is some merit to thinking about a transition area from Heinsberg Road. That's what's in the comprehensive plan to think about something that's more intense and commercially oriented. However, we've reflected on some of your conversation from 2 weeks ago about how would you encourage it to be closer to the interstate? And we've been discussing, well, if you're creating the opportunity to do that on the west side of Heinsberg Road, maybe the same set of equations should be appropriate on the east side of Heinsberg Road by I-89 too. That there may be a different way of thinking about this rather than saying in the R7NC on one side of the street, this is what's allowed, maybe taking a little bit of time and reflecting on what you want for that area,
Yeah.
not at warp speed.
Seems
I
like
think,
that's-
yes, we should
agreeing.
take a little bit of extra time, but we should not do it now. We should try and get this done.
Right,
Okay.
we're saying the same
how,
thing.
is there general agreement with take that out? Well,
And I will say that you asked us to reach out to the property owner of Hill Farm. We did speak with Jeff today. We'd meant to do it previously, but he was a little inundated with Olympic excitement last week with his family.
I didn't
That's
realize
his like
that it
daughter,
was
is
his
that,
daughter.
isn't that
Daughter.
He won a
amazing?
bronze medal, yeah.
Amazing.
And I think Jeff is very interested in seeing something that is a transition in this area. He had some questions at his end as well about what the nature of some of those uses would be. What's the depth? What heights? And he was appreciative that you're thinking about it. Also concerned, frankly, that if you were to do this amendment, that your capacity to then look at it again in 3 months' time would be limited. So I think, he was a little
I
bit of
didn't
two
speak to
minds on
him.
it.
Oh, yeah.
And so I think our recommendation would be to not include sub 2
Mhm.
at all at this time.
Okay, is there general agreement with that holding
Yep.
off? Okay.
Yeah.
Any other changes that people would be interested in seeing? Okay, I'm gonna, so one of the things we had some discussion about, I think Paul was looking up about, was the solar orientation. I know we talked about it a bunch, but there was no conclusion. I want to make sure we're clear on, is there a change there or not?
I thought we were going to look for previous language used elsewhere to see if it
Yeah.
fits.
Right, but I want to make sure we know what we're voting on, if that's in.
I
or
think we
out.
were going to import the language from the other PUDs.
Okay, I think,
So this is the language, so there's language in other PUDs. This is language that applies across the board. That's maybe not exactly what you were thinking
it's
about
more
here.
about not blocking
Yeah.
somebody else's sun.
I'm looking at 13.17 C1.
17. Can you tell me what section this is?
I think you're,
It's in residential design for new homes.
I am in the old regulations. That doesn't help.
So it's page 226 of 382 in the January 18th clean LDRs.
We're all seeing the back of the house here, sorry.
We're actually not.
Oh, you're not?
No.
Ah, great. Even better.
no, you're secret scrolling.
Okay. Now you're seeing it. Section 13, you said?
13.17 residential design for new homes.
Come on. There we go. Okay.
The top, that paragraph is the top, the
Yep.
last sentence.
Residential buildings should orient their roof lines to maximize solar gain potential to the extent possible within the context of the overall. Yeah, I mean, certainly if you want to either copy that language or just have that be stated as a site plan standard, not just residential buildings, but buildings. I think the distinction here is the standard that was in there is about the building and its facade and how it relates to the street, but a roof line is a different thing. I think that the standard that you adopted most recently about solar-ready roofs will already encourage this, but this will reinforce it. So
And on that, if a building is going to have a flat roof, their orientation doesn't matter then, right? Because the solar can be,
right, it's oriented up.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
or at whatever angle the building itself, the roof doesn't have to change. The building doesn't have to change because the roof is flat and the panels can be put on at any angle
It can be
needed.
twisted.
Exactly. Okay.
Yep.
Just wanted to make sure.
Yep.
so people are okay with adding this solar language generally?
And that would be clear to the DRB.
Good.
If it's a flat roofed building, the orientation of the building just
So it's
is
the
released from solar.
orientation for the roof lines to maximize solar gain. So if it's a
So the
flat
roof
roof, then it
line,
doesn't.
flat roof is, okay, got it.
Yes.
That's the line.
Yep.
Okay. Fine. Thank you.
Okay, so Monica, we had talked about the Kennedy Drive landscaping quite a bit, and then there was no conclusion to that. I just want to kind of revisit that. I don't know what kind of a change we would have. to
I don't
that.
either. I kind of looked at Paul and Paul looked like he was pondering and then we moved on.
Paul, is there
So-
something that we would need to do, or is just the landscaping being consistent with what's around it enough, do you think?
Just going back to the standard to look at it again. So what it's saying here is maintain a consistent orientation to the street and maintain consistent building setbacks and landscaping. I don't think that that is contradictory to a statement that says that there shall be a treed area. So if we look, for example, at the O'Brien Hillside, there are two buildings along Kennedy Drive. They're both set back a ways. They're equally set back. it's maintaining a consistent line, and the landscaping in front is reinforcing some of what the comprehensive plan speaks to. So
So does that mean that like at the corner of Kennedy and Heinsberg Road, we want something to happen there? There are trees along Kennedy Drive. Is it clear that those trees stay? It sounds to me like that's what the comp plan is asking for. I'm
Well,
a
I
tree
think the
lover and I
comp-
don't think those are
right.
particularly,
right, I think the comprehensive
important
plan is
trees right there,
talking
but-
about neighborhoods and larger treed areas, not individual trees.
so as long as, I mean, we're asked to do what the comp plan says and the comp plan says this and we have an opportunity. So those lots may,
I have a question.
Ted, go ahead.
Monica's good point is that I know we're encouraging in most places to have a form-based code idea, which is right up to the street. So, is that Trump or is it do the trees that are there existing trump? And would a building be right up to the street? So those trees would be gone?
I
Because
think that the
That's not
appropriate
form-based code, though.
solution to something like that would be probably, let's say it was specifically Kennedy Drive that you were interested in.
Right.
I think establishing in Article 3, you've got setbacks along specific roads. So you might say that in the R12 district along Kennedy Drive, that you're expecting a larger setback and that would be a place where the landscaping and or maintenance of trees could take place.
because you have four
I
different,
think you'd want to be careful that it's not necessarily all of Kennedy Drive because the intersection of Kennedy and Heinsberg is a commercial center.
right. It's sort of a weird corner because there's a water mitigation on one corner and the other corner is a building, commercial building, but it's set back and there's a fair amount of greenery. Then there's the gas station.
Right.
And then this one that we're talking about. So will it
right,
be
which
similar
has
to?
a slip lane, which makes it even more difficult.
Yeah.
I do want to just jump in and mention, because you mentioned Article 3, Kennedy Drive does have 100-foot right of way. So the,
That's probably correct as to what it is, given the
yeah,
the 4 lanes. So it's probably using up most of that right away for the road.
so that might protect it anyway, or
it's
address
also
it.
listed as a street requiring a minimum of 50-foot setback.
Okay,
the same
so
section.
there's, so it
So
is
it's already
50 feet
in.
from the edge of the right of way is the minimum
So
there. So I
that
think
comp-
that to a certain extent
Yeah.
covers that subject.
So that comp plan goal is met by
By
that.
this,
Good,
yeah.
check.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay, so those were all the things that we brought up. I have a list of what we said we were gonna change. To me, it seems they were minor enough that we could possibly move this forward if people were interested with these as modified. Does staff agree with that? These were,
Yes.
okay, so I think we can move on to item 6, which is considering,
Shouldn't we be able to see a clean draft of everything that we've done tonight?
I don't think we need to. I think.
Because we still
um,
have a chance to make edits after the public hearing.
Okay.
Mhm.
So would it be helpful for me to kind of reiterate the items that we kind of gave the general thumbs up to, just so they're all kind of repeated? Okay, I wrote down that in the 2 different locations where there's the option to reduce the amount of civic space by 50%, that the distance would be changed from a 1/4 mile to 500 feet. And that someone would not have to cross a 4-lane road for that reduction to be eligible. Then for 15C07A C, there was unless with TDRs. So that was,
Right, that's the, that you can't increase lot coverage in a general PUD, and Michael's correction that unless, except as authorized via TDR.
yes.
Mhm.
Yep.
And then in that same in B of that section, do you have that? Could you pull that up, Paul? I was
Yeah.
trying to find it. I want to make sure I'm not misspeaking. Yeah, so there were two different things. We reordered the bullet points so that the two at the bottom move up, so that the conform to the goals in the City of South Burlington Comprehensive Plan and the climate action thing, you can word that correctly, gets moved to the first bullet. And the support and enable affordable housing development gets moved to the second bullet.
And the climate action thing is the city council resolution on climate change. Just so
Good.
that- Just for the,
Yes,
just for
yeah.
the public.
Perfect, thank you. I abbreviated, so. And then the third thing that changed in that section is the fourth bullet would read, incorporate a density of development that supports walkable residential mixed use and transit oriented development that is compatible in design with the surrounding area. So it's just kind of reordering that sentence. And the other change was about the solar. So in the building orientation piece,
It's in 14.
yeah, 1406A
1B.
1B, we would add the sentence currently in section 13-23 about the solar.
As a subset E.
Okay, those are
And,
the items.
The R7NC.
Oh, and we're removing the R7, NCR7,
Wait, we're only
Strip.
removing the 400
just the strip.
strip, yeah.
Right, so that is
So that will all be,
15C07 C2 is being removed.
Okay. So those were
and so that
the,
whole part
items
will
to be
be the
removed.
R7.
Jessica, I actually
Will
had,
revert to being a TND.
It'll revert.
did
to
you have
being
something else also?
yeah, I had one more that I had written down. In 1406A1D, the pedestrian orientation. I thought there was general agreement about adding the word safety
Oh,
to and improve and enhance pedestrian connections and walkability, but improve and enhance pedestrian connections, safety and walkability.
I did say that. Was there agreement in adding the word safety
Mhm.
there?
But I mean, the more important thing is the 4-lane road, the other things that we
Yeah.
put in, yeah.
Yeah,
because I
that's
do
a
think-
separate section. This is just
Yeah.
adding the reiterating
Word safety.
the word safety
Yeah.
into
Because
the.
I mean, just
And-
again, we did still agree in November, we were gonna ask the Bike and Ped Committee to to do that, and we have not asked them to do that, but what they come back with may give us more to put
Yes,
in.
more
so I look forward
definition.
to being able to.
Okay, so we can move on to item 6, which is about our report and possibly voting on this.
Can I just add one other one other small correction that we discovered this week that is warned because it's under the definitions correction is totally unrelated to everything else in here, but I think it's an important little correction. It was noticed by our DRB staff that we have accidentally 2 definitions of inclusionary unit in our regulation. Oops, there we go. This is an error because when you expanded the inclusionary unit, inclusionary zoning a year and a half ago, you made a distinction between ownership ones and rental ones. So this one at the top was added. This is the new definition up here, a dwelling unit that is either an inclusionary ownership unit or an inclusionary rental unit. Then you have a very specific definition of what those are.
Those are immediately above this
Yep,
definition.
and then we had meant to delete this one because this was the old definition and we just didn't. So with your permission, we will delete the second inclusionary unit definition, a unit that is affordable to lower moderate income household. That's been much more thoroughly defined up above.
Okay, is that reasonable to add
So
as well?
sorry for adding
up.
something that's a little bit unrelated, but we want to take the opportunity to not have confusion on affordable housing. So
Okay, very good. So we have the report in there. I don't think any of the things that we talked about tonight would change the report concepts. Michael, do you want to go
Yeah.
ahead?
Do any of the things that we changed affect what's written in the report?
So that's what I was just referring to. I don't think so. I think that the report wouldn't need to change because these are all kind of conceptual in detail. Does anyone, I mean, if other people have a different perspective, we could revisit.
Sorry, there's actually one more change that was a little embedded and is related, but is slightly different. It's about removing one thing that would require a master plan from the list of master plans, and that can be either discussed now or it can be,
but that was already decided last
We-
meeting.
I
think that's
included it in
fine.
this
Isn't it in
packet.
here?
Mhm.
We didn't comment, which means
Okay.
it's okay.
Okay.
Yes, it's in there.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So ready for the motion?
Yes, please.
You want me to make it?
I think Ted wants to make it.
I move to approve the planning commission report and to warn a public hearing on the draft amendments to the land development regulations included in this meeting's packet as modified at this meeting, given today's date, for March 22nd, 2022.
And did you say and to approve the report? Or is that a separate motion that you'd like to do?
Oh, you didn't write that in the motion.
Oh. I
Okay,
apologize.
so Ted seconded that one.
I move to approve, it says the report.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay.
I'll
good, it's in
repeat
there.
it.
No, no, that's
No, it's
fine. It's
okay.
in there. You said it. Ted seconded. Okay, any discussion? Paul?
Just very quickly, top of page 4 of the report refers to the quarter mile, so we'll change that to 500 feet.
Oh, good. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah.
I don't believe
the
that there's
4-lane
anything
road.
else that I'm seeing. It didn't get to that level of specificity. The report is a very general,
Oh, okay, fine.
Statement,
Right,
so-
but we got that in the
Yeah.
draft, yes.
Okay, anything else?
before you take action, I'm just triple checking to see that there's nothing that specifically speaks to the R7NC.
And I will inform the Affordable Housing Committee on Monday that we will not be officially asking for an ask, but if they do offer a position, we will discuss it.
Very
Yes,
much so.
as the planning commission has warned a public hearing, please invite them to weigh in on on anything in the public hearing, and we'll do the same for all the committees in the city.
Very good. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And okay, that was everybody. So unanimous. Very good. And we are, no one's participating remotely, so we don't need to do the roll call.
Can
Very
we
good.
come down from
Pass.
warp speed now?
Yes, we can come down from work speed and do the minutes. At less than
I
work
would like
speed.
to ask that I have another chance to review the minutes because I made 2 motions in a meeting and I thought they would be here then, and I'm still not seeing them. So I would like to go back and look at the recordings.
So
Are they
we
in here?
only included the meeting from this last meeting, knowing that you had things that you were interested in the January.
I know, but somebody said, no, it's not in the January meeting. It's in our last one.
Well,
No, I think the understanding is that it's actually in the January 11th meeting, not the 25th.
Okay.
Not, so this is just the February 8th meeting.
Okay.
Which
well,
occurred
I'm
after
fine
the
with this
discussion.
one, 'cause
Okay.
but I do, before those other 2,
Yep.
there's.
Okay, I'm
yeah.
gonna make the motion to approve this minutes, which is February 8th.
Second.
Okay, all, any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, pass.
I have a quick other
Unanimous.
business
Missing
question for you all.
Sure, go ahead.
The city council at their meeting last night started to have a dialogue around how they would like to see the money from the American Recovery Plan Act spent. So the city has a sum of funds, some of that has already been allocated, some of it the council has indicated that they're interested in looking towards affordable housing, and then there's a remaining piece. There's a fair amount of flexibility in the way that funds could be used. Some city committees have already been sort of having some discussions about some recommendations. The council would welcome anyone who'd like to do that either individually as a group. Would you like at your next meeting to have a little bit of time to discuss if there are some broad level or specific recommendations that you'd like to make. That's really a scheduling question.
I think for
If we-
sure. I
Yeah,
think-
if we do, I would like to, this did come up at an Affordable Housing Committee meeting specific to something that Barry is doing with owner occupied. Barry is establishing a fund to support development of owner occupied condos. So maybe it would be good for us to know what Barry and what some others are doing to see if that's something that would go onto that list.
Certainly, and also I would encourage you to also, think of things that maybe other committees aren't necessarily focused on. You have somewhat of a unique role in the city of being able to, along with the city council, look at sort of the big picture, whereas the bike ped committee is thinking about bike ped things, the affordable housing committee is thinking about affordable housing. Not to say that these aren't critically important issues to you, but I would also encourage you, you have a unique area that about overall needs in the city.
And
So
just to clarify, when I
either and
say,
both.
but when I say renter and owner occupied, I'm not thinking affordability. I just happen to come up there and there are people that know a lot more about it than I do. But it's not a committee. It's like, this is like, I think, a strategic discussion that the city needs to have about, so, and there happens to be another community doing something with these funds that we should know about, and I'm not the expert in explaining it.
So it
Okay.
sounds like we're gonna add.
Great. Great, excellent.
Very good. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful night. We are adjourned.
Thank you.
She didn't even let you, Michael. She just adjourned.
You make the motion. I just did it. You love the motion.
Poor Ted. Ted's always wanting to make a motion.
My big moment.
Your big moment is constantly just